Hi, David.
Hey Pam, how are you?
Good, good. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again too. So Rob just sent me a not less than a minute ago saying he was pulled into something at the last moment, so he might not show up for a bit. So
Okay. Have you heard from Rose? Is she doing all right?
I have not heard from Rose. No, I put the thing in and I was expecting to hear from her. That's how I usually chat with her, is through Slack. So yeah, no, it's been amazing. No, I went the last week I was at SIGGRAPH, so that was.
Oh, I had a colleague who also went to SIGGRAPH from Amy, Atefe. Like she said, I guess she had mixed feelings about it. She said it wasn't very well organized, but there were some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. Like some of it was very meh, really, very meh, and a ton of the presenters didn't show up. Like I'd go to a session with 10 papers and there'd be 5 authors. So yeah, so no, but you know, it's not actually my top conference anymore. I mean, it's the one I've always been going to over the years, but no, the track I found most interesting, of course, was the machine learning track, which was given the very profound title of neural rendering. Have you looked at this stuff? It's amazing.
Not in detail, yeah. I mean, I'm aware of a little bit, but not too much.
And I also hooked up with another prof from Germany who's over here, who's very interesting, and I think he might join our group. I've got him reading finite and infinite games at the moment. And we had some interesting ideas as well about using machine learning to try and do some interesting things. But
prof yeah, so, in what, is a machine vision person or?
So neural rendering is all of the above. It's such a broad topic and there's so many different approaches to it. It's very hard to kind of, let me send you a link to a very good.
Oh no, I was just curious about the professor you said you met.
His name is Daniel Velasco. He started off as a pure mathematician.
Okay.
But he ended up in doing motion sickness for VR through a very bizarre and circuitous route. But he was a math prodigy and very interested in the same kind of stuff that you're interested in. So
nice.
Yeah, I finished Sapiens, very good. 10 out of 10, very good book. What else did I read? I've been reading Hume, which is wow.
Which book? A book or just random?
He wrote 2 books. He wrote one later in his career, which was kind of the everyman's version. So it's a little bit lighter and a little bit easier to digest. But his early work, which Bertrand Russell claims has far more, and I would agree with him, has far more meat on the bone, is longer and a little bit more difficult to read. But once again, I would highly recommend both. They're written in English, sort of. And I've got someone coming in. I think it's Rose. Hello.
Guys, this is Rose.
Hey, hey. Welcome back. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. I'm going to be out of it this morning. I need to drop my daughter someplace, and so I'm going to listen in.
Okay.
Because I just want to get back in the habit of doing this, but I will be a little disconnected.
No problem. I was just
how was everyone?
Very good, very good. Had a wonderful holiday in Europe. That was great.
Awesome.
I spent the last week at SIGGRAPH here in town. So yeah. So
what is that? Is it a conference?
It's the Association for Computing Machinery Special Interest Group in Computer Graphics. It's the biggest computer graphics conference in the world. But yeah, so there was a ton of stuff there on neural rendering, which is essentially the intersection between scene representation and machine learning. So very, very interesting, really powerful stuff that we should talk about in our conversations, because I think a lot of it's actually very broad. But yeah, no, it was very good, very interesting. I met a bunch of very interesting people. And I'm just kind of getting back into the groove myself. So I literally finished a graph on Thursday night. Yesterday was just recovering, and then today's my first new day since I headed off. But And how have you been, Rose? How's things with you? What have you been reading?
I've been good. I've been good. I've pretty much taken the summer off of anything related to this. I was in Ireland, kids have been home, work has been busy. So yeah, I've just sort of enjoyed just doing normal stuff and not adding on additional mode.
And, oh, how about you, Pam? Did you do anything while we were in hiatus?
Well, I mean, first of all, we weren't in hiatus. I was meeting with Rob pretty
Oh, you were?
regularly.
Okay, great. I didn't know.
We did miss the last couple of weeks, but yeah, we met for most of it, and I gave a talk to his class, similar to you, I guess. So that was okay. Yeah, I've just been busy at work, transitioning to my more researchy position. So
Okay.
I've been writing proposals and trying to come up with first project that for me to work on for the next 4 to 6 months. Yeah, I'm happy to tell you about it at some point. And one thing for you, David, like if you, since you're in town, you might find this interesting. So there is a new organization. It's called the, I think, Quantum Gravity Institute or something like that. So they're basically hiring these Nobel-winning physicists and putting them into funding the efforts to basically figure out quantum gravity. And they have a conference coming up this Wednesday. It's in downtown. So I got a ticket to go there because one of my friends works at a venture cap firm that is funding the event. So I got it, but I mean, the tickets are like $100. It's not, and includes lunch and stuff. So you might be interested. It's like an all day thing and you get to hear about the latest and greatest in physics if you're interested.
So it just turns out, just on a completely random coincidence, I was in a place called Verona in Italy, and we were walking around this old manor, and they were having the a workshop for quantum gravity.
Okay, wow.
At the villa. So
did you attend or?
I did not attend. No, I didn't have a ticket, but I did take a photograph of the topics to be discussed. It's very interesting. I've read some stuff on quantum gravity. I've read a couple of books by different authors on it, so I have a vague. But no, definitely, I'll pick that up and go. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's just really odd that the investors and people with money are putting together this thing to solve like funding like physicists to do their equations. Like it's the connection is that the contrast is so interesting. Sorry, Rose.
Can somebody give me the high level summary of, do you think?
Yeah, gravity? So yeah, I mean, quantum gravity is sort of one of those sort of holy grails of physics that people since Einstein have been trying to resolve and haven't been able to, and there's many approaches to it. Basically, you could say the last known remaining mystery in physics is that quantum mechanics works great, gravity works great, like the general relativity, especially what Einstein came up with, but they're like fundamentally different views of nature and they don't match up at the boundaries. So at the boundaries, unfortunately, there's not a lot of experiments you can do. The boundaries you can explore at like super high energy. So it would be like black holes or inside of maybe particle accelerators at very, very high energies. But basically these two theories could not be any more different, right? General relativity is all about geometry and continuous spaces, and quantum is all about discrete spaces and very different views of nature. When they work really, really well in their own realms, but connecting them, I think basically there might be a theorem that it's impossible to connect them, meaning that at least one of them is wrong and people don't know how to resolve it. So you get basically two approaches. You get the gravity people trying to quantize gravity, and then you got quantum people trying to figure out a way to extend quantum to sort of larger scales. And this institute that was just founded and funded by venture capitalists, and I don't know why, is basically trying to put a lot of these physicists together and fund them so that they resolve this mystery for the sake of humanity. I guess that's their pitch. But yeah, I mean, the details of quantum gravity is actually beyond me as well. It's very, very complex, and yeah, there's like string theory was one of the contenders for doing this, and you can do it. But the problem is you can almost do anything in string theory that has so many free parameters that you can fit any theory to it. And so it's not really that special that you can do it with string theory. And there are really no predictions that you can test. So you will never know whether it's correct. Yeah, so there's a few of these contenders over the years, but people are still working on it.
Are you going to be attending, Pat?
And
Yeah, I'll be there.
Okay. Sorry, Rose?
do you have ideas about why the people are funding it?
I don't. I'm hoping to
Do you think
find
it's for
out.
greater good?
I think it's just blue sky, right? If they actually discover something interesting, it might have very broad applications, because this is like category theory. This is extremely general stuff.
No, I think I have no doubt it would be amazing if they figure it, but I don't think money was been the issue, right? Like these are like tenured physicists who are not doing this for the money. So like throwing money at it is not going to make it go faster. I guess that's the that's my thought about it. I don't know.
Sounds very interesting.
Well, I mean, by bringing people together into one place, right, it does sort of, it could make things faster, right? Getting people generating ideas by sort of just talking and being around each other.
No, I agree.
Why?
Yeah, makes sense.
Why somebody would fund that? It's not clear to me.
Yeah, it's
Like
very
somebody who's
corporate.
primarily interested in making money.
Yeah, I mean, it's very corporate. I mean, maybe it's a marketing thing. I don't know. But like Roger Penrose is giving a talk. Bill Unruh, Philip Stamp, or another one, Kip Thorne is also a former Nobel team. So Kip Thorne will be there and will give a couple of talks. Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, because the conference, the one-day conference, seems to be very corporate. You know, there's corporate tables you can get for thousands of dollars, and like it doesn't, like there's such a contrast in like what the conference is and who's funding it, that I just find it really fascinating.
Well, I'll definitely be there too. I plan, so I'll see you on Wednesday for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. And I actually we can kind of dive into that. Yeah, so Rob will join us when he can. As I mentioned earlier, he was going to join, but then he got pulled away. So basically what's happened, I know his brother, I knew his brother very well. A very old friend of mine and Rob's brother, who actually is the facilitation of our meeting, passed away recently. So he had Parkinson's. It's been going on for decades. It's not a surprise for anyone, but he's probably dealing with some of that. So
right.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, so we just want to kind of briefly circle back to the topic I was introducing. So reading Hume is, I think, very not what I thought. Like I thought that he basically just had one kind of claim and kind of just goes over it again and again. And that's not what I get at all. He actually develops a very rich and detailed theory of mind. And it's quite remarkable given the era that it was written in. He makes a very interesting point, which is the point I quoted. I don't know if either of you had a chance to look at what I posted in the forum, but I'll read it out just this one sec.
Did you tag us by any
I have
chance?
not had
Because
a
I didn't
chance
get
to
it.
look at it.
I didn't, and that was my mistake, so I should have. My bad. So I'll just share it with you. Let's see, share screen. Where is it? This one. Yeah, so I'll just make it a little bit smaller so you can actually. Rose, I'll read it out to you. I know you're on the phone. So this is the quote that I think is the most relevant one. Thus, so this is him talking about cause and effect. Thus, not only our reason fails us in the discovery of the ultimate connection of causes and effects, but even after experience has informed us of their constant conjunction, it is impossible for us to satisfy ourselves by reason why we should extend that experience beyond those particular instances which have fallen under our observation. So that's pretty strong. Basically,
that's the problem of induction. Yeah. I guess it's in the next paragraph. Makes sense.
Yeah. So so my point was that Hume's notion of cause and effect is predicated solely on prior observations of the constant conjunction of two features, right? So his argument is that the best you can do, the best of all possible results would be to collect a huge number of observations, and in every single observation, we see a constant conjunction between two features. And if we do that for billions or trillions of things, then probabilistically, we could say that it's very likely, given the statistical history that we have, that that constant conjunction will project into the future. But there's no necessity of that. And, you know, Bertrand Russell's famous turkey story is the kind of antithesis of that, where the turkey is fed every day and it comes into this belief that every day for forever it'll be fed until the day that gets his head chopped off. So, yeah, so Hume really makes a strong claim that we can't go beyond constant conjunction, and that our best understanding of causality has to be based on nothing more than probability. And I think that's very interesting. But there's also a cognitive science angle, which is since each observer has their own set of observations, in other words, you see the world in your experience and I see it in mine, it's quite possible that many agents perceive cause and effect relationships where others who either have observed contrary observations or have no memory of such conjunctions might hold very different subjective views. So if you grew up in a country where certain things were always together, and throughout all of your life and all of your parents' lives, those things were constantly conjoined, it's very likely that that would become a cause and effect belief in that culture, right? And they would have very, very strong beliefs around the constant conjunction of those two things. Whereas in a different culture, they might have a different experience and not perceive that cause and effect relationship at all, right?
So do you know, like in Hume's view, so when he talks about causation, are we talking about like absolute causation or probabilistic causation, or correlation is also included in this?
So this is early work, so it's kind of prior to those very good distinctions that you make. I'm not suggesting that he had strong awareness of those distinctions. I think, so in his era, causation was teleology, right? It comes from the schoolmen and the religious belief that we can, you know, there is purpose to the universe and everything is for a reason. And so the cause and effect argument is very teleological. And he's rejecting the teleological argument, saying that all we have is our experience, and in our experience, you know, we are probabilistic. So if I toss a coin, then I understand that there's a 50% probability it'll be heads and a 50% probability it'll be tails, and 100% probability it'll be one or the other, but only because of my experience. So he makes the strong.
But is that true? I wonder, I wonder, because you can probably see, like in history and even now, like people draw causal relations even with just one data point, right? Like I don't think, like cognitively, we don't rely on probabilities necessarily. We make up stories, right, or models that then we extrapolate infinitely into the future for wrongly or rightly, depending on whether you get it right. But I don't think naturally we are necessarily probabilistic.
I would agree, and I would agree that
maybe we start with.
Go ahead, Rose.
Sorry, I was just going to say, maybe we start with probabilistic, but a lot of it is forming the narrative and the components of the narrative, right? So once we start to define objects and how they relate to each other, that's really, then there are certain things that we recognize, right? And we start to form beliefs and build them off of each other.
Right, right. But I would say that there is a shortcut. Sorry, go ahead. I missed what you said. Sorry, please say again.
Well, I guess I was going to say, I think maybe like you were talking about in different countries and stuff, but even outside of cultures, right? Cultures within ways of thinking about the world. So like within specializations, or, you know, say the way a physicist defines the world would be very different than, say, the way an acupuncturist defines the world, which would be very different than, say, the way a priest defines the world or something.
Right. Because in their individual personal experiences, they have So I think there is one thing that I just want to introduce, which is I believe there is a cognitive shortcut, which is a kind of a one-shot learning that we all have, which is given a single example, we just assume that that's always going to be the case. If I put my hand on the stove and I burn my hand, I will never put my hand on the stove again, right? That's instant cause and effect, right? And we have a huge cognitive shortcut where, given a single example, often we will infer a cause and effect relationship, let alone the constant conjunction. This shortcut, I think, is a major feature of our cognitive worldview, right? And the fact that we essentially create these instantaneous judgments of cause and effect based on little or if any data, and then we essentially promote them to be absolute truth in our mind. And it actually takes a huge amount of effort and a huge number of counterexamples and counter-arguments and reframing to actually diminish that initial one-shot learning event. So
I think we only promote them and do the shortcut if we have a good narrative around it, right? Because saying that, like, we might touch the stove once and get burned and then never again do that, actually sometimes we do it multiple times, right? Because
sure.
we're trying to form a narrative.
Right. So if we're uncertain, or if we believe that there is some other factor involved, then we might want to get some more data. Certainly.
But I'm still trying to I'm just rereading that first paragraph by Hume. Like I can't figure out whether that's something profound or just something trivial, because of course, like, even if you do a scientific experiment 10,000 times and you always get the same result, you can use the same argument. Maybe the 10,001st time it would be totally different. So you can't possibly know, but that's ridiculous, right? I mean, it is true that we can never possibly know in principle 100%, but just doing it a bunch of times and having faith that it will continue to be that way seems to be pragmatically obvious. So is this something profound that we can't possibly know, or is it just some philosophical thing to write papers about and it's not really relevant to us?
Depends. It does dethrone kind of given causation, right? So making, extrapolating from a cause and effect relationship many steps, I think, is dangerous, because how do I put this? That's actually not where I was going with it. So I would generally agree with you that the theory of science is that, generally speaking, the future is a continuation of the past, and that is a good assumption to make the vast majority of the times, right? And I think we all agree that that is the case. So given a very large number of prior examples where the constant conjunction exists, and given no counterexample has ever been observed, that would make the probability of a prediction using these priors much more likely than not, but not a guarantee. And his argument, all I think he's trying to get to is you can't get to a guarantee. You can just get to very likely. And the guarantee is outside of possibility. Right,
but he's also like super like maybe that's what you have to do, but to make an argument, but to make it compartmentalized to like one case that repeats and you know nothing about anything else in the world. Because even in the case of the chicken or the rooster who gets who gets killed, you could imagine the chicken can learn that this is going to happen at some point in the future, even though he sees this repeating. It's not like one thing that's happening and you don't know anything else about anything else, right?
Sure. Okay, but where I was going was a subtle twist on this. So let me just try and get to the final bit. Maybe you'll understand where I was trying to get to.
Sure.
No, that's fine. So further, many agents' predisposition to infer causation from constant conjunction has been heavily exploited by external agents in modifying their behavior. Right, and so I have this picture of a jaguar warrior from Mesoamerica, and he has dressed himself up like a jaguar. And I think the reason I'm very interested in this, and I spent a lot of my time on my trip in Europe looking at these ancient artifacts. So if you live in a jungle where jaguars kill children, right? Like the stove example, you will have an inherent fear of jaguars and you will respect them and behave differently in their presence as opposed to them not being present. And the jaguar warriors exploited this fear by dressing up as jaguars, because when you see the jaguar skin on the jaguar warrior, you think it's a jaguar. And so you mentally frame them as being this killer and this very, very dangerous thing, as opposed to just some guy wearing a shirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, in nature, we have butterflies that mimic the eyes of owls, so that when creatures who typically eat butterflies see this butterfly, they think it's an owl and they run away in fear because of the same kind of cause and effect response that they've had in the past, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that many times the cause and effect relationship, the constant conjunction, is actually behavioral. It's not actually intrinsic in the nature of the world. It's actually a behavioral trait which is trying to exploit an external constant conjunction and modify the behavior of the agents to your advantage, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if there was a way that we could distinguish between true kind of constant conjunction, I won't even call it causation. So if we build a giant hadron collider and we smash things into each other and we see a constant conjunction, that gives us a piece of information. But if we want to publish a paper on Alzheimer's disease and we don't have the results we want, we just make a bunch of shit up to give the illusion of constant conjunction, then we can get our paper published, but the conjunction doesn't actually exist, right? So how can we distinguish between true and fake constant conjunction and thus causation? Like, can we? Is there some means by which we could construct some experiment to see if the constant conjunction is contingent on some prior or some other piece of knowledge? I don't know.
Well, isn't that where the whole like purpose of the do calculus and all that is, like to figure out whether there is true causation or just conjunction or correlation?
Sure.
So it's
So
like in
maybe
case
that's
of
the
the
answer.
butterfly, like you go and poke the butterfly. If it doesn't eat you, it means you were right and it's the butterfly, right? You can easily verify.
I see.
But I guess
It's
it's
so
kind of the
interesting
GANs,
thinking
right?
about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that just the biological aspects of it, like when we're talking about, for example, the butterfly or the jaguar, it seems like there's almost something that's biologically created and hardwired in situations like that, right? Where it's not that there's a rational process going on, right? It's just like there's just a reaction. It's hardwired in some way. We're not going through the steps of trying to validate that something exists or not exists. And in a similar way, we do the same things with our ontologies and our beliefs, right? Once we sort of hardwire something in terms of asserting this is a fact and it can no longer be questioned, that's kind of where we get into trouble about true causation, right? I think we do have the ability to test these things as long as we truly want to test them, as opposed to what we want to do is enforce the beliefs we already hold by never questioning the things that we truly believe are fact.
Spot on, yes.
And I guess
Exactly.
there's
In terms of
also an
knowledge.
opportunity, right? Like it's not just the risk too, right? Like, for example, if you're an investor, like the way, I don't know, I'm not an investor, but the way you would make money is to be contrarian and be right, right? So if you go against what everybody else perceives to be some cause and effect relationship and you're right, you could make a lot of money, right?
Maybe, or
I
maybe
think
it's
what's
just.
really interesting
Sorry, go
about
ahead.
that example is the idea, again, with the McKilchrist thing, that like we almost create the reality, and sometimes we believe that like fact is leading us, whereas in actual fact it's once we assert something, then that becomes the reality and it guides everybody to follow that pattern in some way. And I think investing is a really good example of that. Like a lot of the time it has nothing to do with what we would consider to be the hard facts, and everything to do with what does everybody believe about the situation.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of McGilchrist, he just has a new book. I don't know if you guys probably know about it, right? It's called The Matter,
it's like
Matter
this
with
thing.
Things.
Yeah,
Is it?
it's like-
Okay, I just so there's an interview with Jordan Peterson and McGilchrist now. It was pretty interesting. He talks about his book.
Mhm. How far are you
That's the
through
book
it,
I've been
Rose?
reading for the last 6 months.
Okay, okay.
I stopped reading it over the summer. I think I'm close to the end of the first book,
Okay.
which honestly is a lot of the stuff we've already covered. I think in the second book, he's getting into more of the newer ground, but the way he goes about things, he has to sort of lay it all out again. And so that's taken, I don't know, I'd say at least 6 months, right? I think maybe it was around December I started that.
So heading up towards 8
It's
months.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big fat book. But yeah, so I guess where I was going was so there's this idea that I've come across where, how do we get to this? So let's take our a topical situation like the views of race in southern United States, right? And they have this very strange view where there's some difference between people of different skin color. I don't want to get into it. I'm not trying to have the argument. I'm just trying to speak at a very high level. So I would argue that nobody's really guilty of doing anything wrong. It's just in their cultural experience and their constant conjunction and their kind of worldview, this constant conjunction between this way of seeing the world has been reinforced over hundreds of years. And simply by growing up in that environment, not being a bad person or having bad ideas or doing anything wrong, your biological systems form this constant conjunction, which essentially seems discontinuous with our worldview because we have different experience. So it's not like they're bad people or they've done something wrong or they're guilty of anything. It's just their life experience has led them to that constant conjunction. Whereas in our life experience, that constant conjunction is absolutely foreign to us.
Maybe so here is a maybe counterintuitive one. Is that causation actually the important one or the conjunction? Like I wonder, like I feel like some cases conjunction is more relevant to your survival than figuring out the true causation, right? So let's see as an example, maybe a controversial one. I'm just gonna make it up. So let's say you are in some state where every black person you meet is a gangster, right? Let's say you've never seen a black person who was actually like a doctor, just because of whatever society, whatever racial bias, it doesn't matter. So you will make the connection that whenever you see a black person on the street, you got to be careful or try to go cross the street.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But in that state, it might actually save your life because there are no black doctors in that state. So you should be rightfully afraid that that person is probably a gangster, right? Even though you probably know that being black doesn't cause you to be a gangster, right? And you could be other things, but it just happens that in your state, all the black people were gangsters. So it makes sense for you to use the conjunction and not the causation.
Right, but my point, I completely agree, but are you guilty of something? Did you do something wrong?
Absolutely not, I would say.
No, right?
I mean, you could be wrong if you take the next step and say that is causation. All black people are gangsters just because of blah, blah, blah. And everywhere else you go, if you start believing that, maybe you're committing some crime, right?
My argument is you're
I have to jump in a second. Like maybe you're not wrong in that case, but as soon as you start taking action based upon that or rule of thumb, then you were reinforcing that view of reality.
Right.
And so that's where it becomes really dangerous, right? It's not wrong or right in itself. It's just that then from that moment forward, other things happen that reinforce that view of reality. And I think it's with machine learning, that's where we're like, okay, we need to be very careful here because things that we have done cognitively as humans, somebody wrong or a bad person or whatever. No, that's not the issue. But unless you are actively taking actions to stop that, and we suddenly end up in a very bad situation where we have these reinforcement feedback loops like we see all the time, right, with machine learning.
Right.
Poor people get poorer. Black people have less opportunities. Women have less opportunities in certain situations, right? Does that make any particular person bad person? No, but like as a society, we kind of have to do something different.
Yeah, but I think that's the problem, though, right? Like, we don't get to decide what to do as a society. You only get to decide what to do as a person, usually, and unless you're whatever is in a special place. But so if like going back to the examples of the town, I don't think it makes rational sense for you to continue approaching the Black person in your towns to sort of promote better future society, right? At the cost of maybe getting shot or something, right? So you will probably don't care about future of society. You'll worry about your own survival, and at the same time maybe promote. You would continue with the whole sort of system, and as you rightly said, of course it's a feedback system, right? So probably when the Black children come up, everybody looks at them as gangsters. Maybe they won't get the education opportunities so that they can be something other than a gangster, and the whole thing continues, right? But I don't know if you can solve it at the level of individual who makes the decisions.
So I think that the problem is that we use the individual, the non-culpability of the individual almost as a rationalization for why it's not dangerous to do it at scale. Right, so it might be a fact in that circumstance for whatever reason, but then as soon as we start to scale that up past individual to multiple situations, I mean, that's exactly what we're dealing with, right? So by saying, well, you can only make the decision as an individual, we are sort of in unique situations in that anything we build is not a decision for an individual person. It's be scaled just because of the nature of the work we do.
So how do we do that, though? Do we do it, I mean, do we do it by presenting counterexamples? Do we go down to the places where this constant conjunction has been in play for generations and show them videos on billboards of counterexamples that will slowly diffuse their beliefs in the constant conjunction of these things? Or do we lock up people who happen to have a series of experiences in their life that led them to some conclusion?
No, it's a great question, right? How do we do that? Like, how do you influence people to give up beliefs that maybe are not congruent with causality?
Right. And so now we've kind of come to the kind of punchline of where I was trying to get to. Yeah. So this is it. This is where I was trying to get to in the talk. So that's great. We got there. I don't have the answer. I'm just curious what your thoughts might be.
But do we even agree on, I mean, not we, but does society even agree on where we want to go? Like, just because you feel strongly one way or the other people might feel differently, right? Rightly or wrongly, right? Like, can we agree as a society where you want to go?
Very good question.
I think we've stopped actually having discussions about where we as a society want to go, because it's all down to winning the arguments and trying to build ontologies and structures in some form that people might not even believe, right? And we have to reinforce them so that we don't lose.
Yeah, I mean, arguments.
So like in a way, tearing. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, please finish.
No, but just, I guess, tearing down those things that are kind of have become sacred in some way, right? And it's like, that's not the piece of it. there's something else here that we need to learn to identify and see.
Mhm.
I
Yeah, I
think
mean-
we're at the point where we're afraid to tear down some of the stuff that, like, oh, this is our sacred belief.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
so I
as
was
soon
going
as
to
we
say
give up
something.
ground.
Yeah, I was going to say something along those lines. Like I thought, maybe naively, that I guess the purpose of all this is we want to maybe eventually get to a point where we see past race, gender, whatever, all these stuff, and everything is sort of judged or according to people's abilities or needs or all that good stuff that I thought was self-evident. But society seems to be going in a different direction, where what used to be considered like a bad thing, like being a minority or being gay or being black, now is actually being used to promote you to be better than everybody else. Is basically going racist or sexist the other way completely. And that seems to be where society is going. Like it's not, you're not equal to a white person because you're black, you're better because you're black. And that's going in it. So that's why I'm wondering where society wants to go, because I don't think we agree. Some people, like, I would be happy if everybody was completely gender blind and color blind, and you don't even consider any of this, and you don't even notice that you're the person you're talking to, what's their race or gender or whatnot. But that doesn't seem to be at least where Western society is going, right? You want to maximize exposure to all these minority groups, and like it's like an opposite direction of what I think we should be going.
So is it society as a whole wants that or is going in that direction? Or does it come down to there is a tiny % of bad actors who are trying to recast a narrative in a way that causes people to become divisive?
Well, I don't think they consider themselves to be bad actors, right? Like, I mean, like look at Netflix. I was just watching this new show, The Sandman, on Netflix. It's like the most ridiculous thing I've seen. Like so it's a fantasy series, right? It's a great show. It's a great story. But first of all, most actors in there are black. Half of them are transgender, gay. There is everything that I've never seen in my life. Like it seems to be it's like a common in that series, which is fine, but it gives a wrong impression. Like this is not what you would experience in the world, right? But they wanted, I don't know what the purpose of this is. Like why, like it's a story about dreams and fantasy world that it has nothing to do with race or sex or gender. Like I really don't understand what is the purpose of like intentionally injecting all these things to every Netflix show. Like if you look at the recent Netflix shows, all of them are charged racially, culturally. Like it's not about the story anymore. It's about whatever message they want to get into the society.
Yes.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of like to take a really egregious example, right? Like Donald Trump managing to use like abortion as a wedge issue, right? It's not that he holds religious beliefs that abortion is wrong, right? But he manages to take this issue and get people who might agree on 90% of the issues to suddenly be at each other's throat about this one issue that becomes a wedge issue, right? It's not that he truly believes any of the stuff that he has kind of promoted, right? It's a weapon to him, right? It's something he can leverage. So if we can identify maybe some of what has become these sacred issues and redirect the conversation back to the actual issues rather than I have to be on this side of this argument.
Yeah, I guess politics
forcing
is
it to be
tricky.
a binary.
Right.
Because the very nature of it, that's the very nature of it.
Well, I
It's
mean,
about
politics
making
is
people
tricky because you want to win, right? The purpose of politics is to win, is not to solve society's issues, right?
I actually disagree with you.
I mean, I'm saying from the perspective of like people like Donald
Politicians.
Trump, like politicians. I'm not saying that's the way it should
Right.
be.
Right.
But do you think that most politicians, that's the way they view it, or do they view it that by winning, then you can try and fix society's problems, and you think the way to fix society's problems are whatever.
Well, the problem is that people who think that way probably won't succeed to become successful politicians. You need to be very Machiavellian and like backstabbing to even get to a point where you can do that. And it's just self-selective, right? I don't think honest politicians can survive and get to the top.
But I think the problem is that they use us as weapons, right? They only have power. We're behind them. And it's that piece of it. Is there something there that we can solve?
Interesting. So, I mean, one thing we could do is we could build machine learning models that show how these mechanics work. And if we can essentially reproduce using some synthetic system how these systems work, we could then explore and demonstrate different remediation strategies and how they might work and their effectiveness. So we could essentially promote this into a virtual kind of in silico challenge to see if we can reproduce observed results, and then essentially use reinforcement learning or evolutionary programming to try and discover mechanics that can make headway in these very difficult cognitive kind of side effect issues, which drive us to these very bad outcomes like the war in Ukraine and Trump and other things. So it's that's where I was thinking we might be able to go, but maybe it really is just a sociological problem and we have to solve it in the political domain. I don't know.
I mean, it is ultimately I guess I have my bias view, but it's ultimately a massive multi-agent problem, right? Like Rose, when you say what we can do together to get the politicians to follow, like what is we? How do we coordinate in a way that's consistent? So of course, if everybody in the US coordinated their efforts, they could get politicians to do exactly what they want to do. But first of all, we don't agree on everything. And also even if we do, when we do agree, we can't coordinate effectively to do something, right? So then you need like these leaders, and then the leaders have their own agenda. So there's a lot of problems, right, to coordination.
Right. But if we could, essentially, my argument being that if we could build large multi-agent simulations, we might be able to try and once again reproduce these negative outcomes. And then if we were able to consistently reproduce them and explain them, that would be, I think, a very useful first step. And then if we had these models where we can see this negative emergent behavior, we might be able to essentially have large groups of researchers study mechanics and see what works and what doesn't, and try that and fit that to real world data and try and remediate this in a scientific fashion. I just don't see that working because it would disempower those who want power the most. So they would try and curtail and obstruct such mechanics because they would lead to the downfall of their political regime.
Well, I mean, maybe the best way, or the way that at least I've seen, the only way I've seen work, is to somehow set up the game in such a way that if everybody just did whatever it is according to their nature, being selfish and whatever, they would still end up with the outcome that's good for everyone, right? Like if you make something like whatever, saving the climate somehow a value, like putting the money on it, or it would make you rich if you do that, then you can just let people go do whatever you want to do, and then we end up with what we want, right? I mean, it's a little bit idealistic and it's not trivial to set up a game, but maybe that's where this simulation comes in, right? Like how would you set up the game in a way that if you have agents the way you are, let's say you can't change people, they're biased, they're limited cognitive ability, they're selfish, and if you have that, is there a way you can set up a game that ends up with a better results for everyone?
And I'm simply suggesting that we could use machine learning style approaches to come up with the rules of that game and suggest that those policies should be embraced by democratic cultures and that they would lead to fairer outcomes. So very cool. Okay, interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Rose? Do you think that having a scientific body studying this kind of thing would have any effectiveness, or it would just be sidelined by the rich and powerful who want to keep status quo as it is?
I honestly don't know the answer. I guess I feel like everything ends up being co-opted to people with power at some point in time.
Right.
And that's the piece of it that has to break. Like if you look at a lot of the things that we've talked about democratizing through technology, the exact opposite happens.
Yes.
Because technology remains in the hands of the powerful.
Mm.
It's such a hard problem to solve. Like
But it is a pressing problem, and it's a very real problem that we need to deal with. So I don't
Mhm.
think we can just stick our head in the sand, or maybe we have to because that's the only option left to us. But if we were try and go beyond just saying that that's a problem and identifying the kind of cognitive roots of that problem, where does that get us? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, I guess understanding the problem is the first piece of it, right? And if we can use technology to understand what the root of the problem is, maybe then we can understand ways to try and go about solving it.
But that might
mean, I
end
think
up
there are
just
plenty
empowering the
of-
politicians even more, as you say, because we would develop new technology for mass, belief manipulation, and then that would be used in a negative sense again.
Mhm.
So
I wonder, just maybe in a bigger context, like how are we in the course of like longer history, like do we have problems that we haven't had before, or like it feels like even with all these problems, we're still at the best point in the history of mankind, right? Going back a couple of thousand years, it was way worse. You probably wouldn't find out about it. People weren't as connected, but I'm sure politicians lied a lot more. They killed a lot more. Everybody was a lot more sexist, racist. So all those things have improved somewhat over just, I guess. So what made them improve? And maybe it's already not that bad, and it should be just panicking because you hear about all these things all over the world asynchronously, and they add up in your mind, and you feel like everything is so much worse than it was before.
Well, I guess, but there are things out there like global warming and climate change that
Sure.
like need to feed into that idea too, right? So maybe things are better in some places for some things, but the path we're on right now has us charging towards destruction.
Yeah, climate change, I guess, is a separate one. Yeah, that's the tough one.
But
Yeah,
I guess it's not separate though, right? Like it's all linked to it, right? So a lot of the stuff we do, and like that idea of like, well, we just like if everybody just gets to be selfish, we see where that ends up. I think at this point we can see that.
right. And so we could develop media campaigns where we essentially promote the constant conjunction of global catastrophe with certain actions. And then, people would then essentially cognitively just know that, not using the recycling bin will lead to the end of the world. And so they'll use the recycling bin. I'm not sure that's, I don't think anyone has really proven that recycling is going to save the world, but that there's this political kind of agenda of trying to promote this constant conjunction between the actions of the individuals, your mundane actions as to how you throw out your garbage, and the fact that that's going to, radically alter the future of humanity. That does promote behavioral change, right? We now all recycle more than we ever did before. So that technique has proven to be successful. I just wish we had a kind of a more substantive set of actions we could take, which had that same kind of simplicity that might actually have a real impact, as opposed to just putting garbage in separate piles as opposed to one big pile. So
I feel like climate change is almost like the perfect storm. Like if you wanted to come up with one problem that you're just the worst equipped to deal with as a human, as a society, I think that would be it, right? It is sort of long-term effect. You do whatever you do now probably doesn't directly affect it until maybe the next generation even. I guess now we're seeing a little bit more direct outcome, but before, like 10 years ago, it seemed ridiculous to want to worry about these things that might happen sometime in the future. The science is tricky. Like some people are still arguing that this is just a fluctuation, blah, blah, has nothing to do with us. And even if you think it has something to do with us, it's not clear whether it's already too late, in which case you might as well not destroy the economy of your country while everybody's burning down. And then, of course, you have the problem of there are countries like US or the West who burned all these fossil fuels to get to where they are. And then rightfully, like India and China, they said, well, we want to get to where you got to as well. Why are you telling us to not burn things now that you've already advanced and got to that point? So there's also that issue. It's just so many problems that are all working together to make it almost like intractable. Like I have no answers to how to deal with this. I don't think there's any way to stop it. It's just going to happen and probably going to lead to some extinction of a good chunk of the population until we figure out how to deal with it.
Maybe what I was thinking is that for a lot of these problems, there are arguments that we know are straw man. There's just a straw man that people are putting out, and there's emotion attached to it, but there's no reality attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And until we can let go of some of those things, it's hard to have a conversation about how to really fix some of these problems. And maybe that's just the role that we as technologists can take, is to try and demonstrate that the straw man is in fact a straw man.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is probably like related. The climate problem is like a much more complicated version of the, SUV versus small car problem, right? Like if you are choosing a car for your family, you look, and if everybody drove small cars, then everybody would be better off for it, right? But then if you see a lot of people are driving SUVs, you will have to rational choices to buy SUV to be more safe for your family. And there's no way out of it from like at an individual level, right? I don't think it's a good idea to set an example by driving a small car, hope that everybody will do the same. It's not rational, right? From a game theoretic perspective. But maybe somebody from outside, the government, could put a tax on these SUVs and then hope that will change things, right? I guess it's probably similar with the climate change. But in that case, it's even harder because one government is not enough to do this and nobody's controlling all the governments. So then you get into this more complicated situation.
Interesting. Well, we're coming up on time. I've already bought my ticket time, so I'll see you on Wednesday.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Looking forward to it. Yeah, looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Okay. So just a quick update. My father is getting very old. He's now 94, and I will be heading over to Australia in September, and that just screws up this time slot. So we might have to move the time slot to something where I can actually be awake. I'd still like to continue the conversation. I really want to make it work. I don't know how long I'm actually going to be there, so I might be there for a little while. We'll see how things go. Mm-hmm. But just letting you know that I might have to change the time slot next time. So.
Yeah, we can organize.
Sounds
Any
good.
new books, Payam? Any new books that you can recommend? How's The Devil in the Details coming? Is that proving
It's
to
good.
be?
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I'm mostly through it. I haven't quite finished, but yeah, I'm mostly through it. There's a bunch of other books I'm reading, but I don't have the presence of mind to list them for you now. But I'll share on Slack or next time.
Well, just if you've done every great book you've suggested has been a truly great book. So if you've discovered any new ones, I'd love to know. All right.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Excellent. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you all again very soon. Take care.
Okay. See ya. Bye.
See you next week. Bye.